My brother's roommate secretly took photos of me to frame my brother for abuse, so we kicked him out and got him charged with harassment. 2 years later, he's begging me to save him from his own parents. My older brother is the love of my life. Okay, I guess that's a pretty weird way of saying it, but he really is my hero. One of my first memories is being 6 years old and walking out of the grocery store together. My bike had vanished and the broken chain was left behind. I immediately broke into tears, blaming myself. But the next morning, I woke up to a new bike in my bedroom because my brother, who was just 13 at the time, had sold his favorite signed baseball glove to pay for it. And when I thanked him profusely, he just hugged me and said, "This is what brothers are for." His love was always unconditional. So we were both in the car one day when a truck driver was driving dangerously close to us on the highway. I was listening to white girl music and pretending to be in a music video. So when my brother was shouting at me to put my seatbelt on, I didn't listen. And my mom just laughed and told him to stop being so overprotective. But my brother didn't care. He reached across to secure me right as the impact happened. And just 11 days later, we were standing at our mom's grave in black clothes that still had the tags on. I was 14 and my brother was 21. We didn't even have time to grieve because they tried to shove me into a foster home and lock away the key. But Caleb did everything to make sure it didn't happen. He spent his entire savings on fighting for custody, and there was a long list of things he had to do before they even considered letting him be my legal parent. Rent a huge apartment, take parenting classes for 8 months every weekend, and even broke up with his girlfriend of 5 years to make sure it didn't interfere with the case. After 2 years and $12,000 down the drain, he finally won. The 3 weeks that followed were probably some of the best I'd ever experienced. For the first time, everything just felt peaceful. He was the only person I felt safe enough to let my guard down with, and for the first time since the crash, I actually let myself grieve. No dark humor, no fake smiles, just me crying into his arms. And that's when his roommate Craig moved in, because he simply couldn't afford to pay rent by himself. At first he seemed nice, and my older brother Caleb seemed to trust him, so I did too. He didn't work much since his parents paid for everything, so I came home to him every day after school. And in the second week, while I did my usual routine of crying my eyes out and looking at old photos of my mom, Craig came into my bedroom. You know Caleb's too nice to ever say this, but you're seriously draining him. Maybe keep it to yourself sometimes. His tone was completely flat, like he was sick of me. When he walked out, I was immediately filled with self-hatred. From then on, I made sure to only cry at school in the bathrooms. Whenever I was home, I'd gaslight myself into thinking I was over the death and ready to move on with my life. And since I wasn't crying when I needed to, I took on a new coping mechanism: starvation. I must have been eating around 400 calories a day, with a diet of ice cubes and chewing gum. One day I was heading down the stairs to school. My calves were aching from how little I was eating, and I was so weak that my school bag felt like it was filled with bricks. "Hey!" Craig yelled. "I've noticed how far you've come with the whole moving on thing. Just wanted to give you kudos." I was so hungry that I couldn't even focus on what he was saying, so I just nodded before getting on the school bus. I was wearing a t-shirt and short shorts when Caleb burst into my room that evening. His jaw dropped. "What the actual F? I'm sorry!" I screamed. "I thought you wouldn't be home." I then grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around myself. "Olivia, when was the last time you ate a full plate of food?" Tears filled his eyes, and his hands were trembling. Suddenly, a wave of guilt washed over me. "I'm sorry, Caleb. You weren't meant to see." He cut me off by lunging at me for a hug. "Olivia, you love food. I don't understand why you would do this." By this point, I was still convinced that Caleb was mad at me, so I just wanted him to stop blaming me. Craig told me to. He didn't say anything. His grip on me loosened, and he had this faraway look in his eye. It was 4 a.m. when Craig came home that evening, and I guess Caleb assumed I was asleep, because as soon as the front door slammed, my brother was walking down the stairs to greet him. I heard him crash into something as he stumbled backwards from Caleb's impact. "You're moving out tomorrow. Idgaff where you end up, but if I see you go anywhere near my sister, you're effing dead." His voice had an anger I didn't recognize, and I guess Craig was pretty scared too, because he didn't respond. When Caleb came up the stairs, he opened my door and grabbed me gently to see if I was awake. I turned over to face him. "I'm sorry. I know rent is more expensive now. Don't be." His voice was soft and reassuring like always. "Craig can eat shut. You will always come first." The day after he moved out, there was a knock on the door. It was the police. They had gotten an anonymous report that Caleb was abusing me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I immediately knew it was Craig, trying to get revenge. The officers asked to speak with me alone, and I could see the panic in Caleb's eyes. He'd fought so hard to keep me, and now this could ruin everything, unraveling all our sacrifices in an instant. The female officer sat me down in my bedroom and asked if Caleb had ever hurt me. I almost laughed in her face. "My brother is the only person who's ever protected me," I told her. "He gave up his entire life to take care of me after our mom died." She seemed skeptical, asking about my weight loss and if I felt safe at home. I explained everything about Craig and how he'd told me I was a burden to my brother. I showed her pictures of me from before Craig moved in, proving the weight loss happened recently and under suspicious circumstances. After about an hour, they left. The female officer gave me her card and told me to call if I ever needed help. Caleb was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. When the door closed behind them, he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought they were going to take you away," he whispered, his voice cracking. I sat next to him and put my head on his shoulder. I'd never let that happen. We ordered pizza that night, and Caleb watched me eat every bite of my 2 slices. It was the most I'd eaten in weeks, and I felt sick afterward, but the relief on his face was worth worth it. The next morning, my phone started blowing up with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. They were all from people claiming to be distant relatives I'd never met, saying things like, "We're worried about you," and "Your brother isn't equipped to raise a teenager." One even said, "We should have taken you in after the accident." I showed Caleb, and his face went pale. "These are people who refused to even come to Mom's funeral," he said. Craig must have tracked them down somehow. That's when we realized this wasn't over. Craig wasn't just angry about being kicked out, he was actively trying to destroy us. And the worst part? He was just getting started. I blocked all the numbers immediately, but the damage was already done. My mind was racing with paranoia. Who were these people? How did Craig find them? And why the hell did they suddenly care about me after ignoring us for years? The texts kept replaying in my head, fake concern wrapped in thinly veiled threats about my unstable living situation and how I deserved better care. Caleb called in sick to work that day to deal with this mess. He spent hours on the phone with our caseworker, explaining the situation and forwarding the texts as evidence of harassment. The caseworker seemed sympathetic, but warned us that any formal complaint from these relatives would trigger an automatic investigation. "Standard procedure," she said, like that was supposed to make us feel better. I watched Caleb's face grow more strained with each passing minute, the dark circles under his eyes more pronounced than ever. "We need to be careful," Caleb told me that night over dinner. Yes, I was actually eating again, small portions, but it was progress. "Craig knows exactly how to hurt us. He's targeting the custody arrangement." I nodded, pushing my mac and cheese around the plate. The cheese sauce had congealed into an unappetizing orange mass, but I forced myself to take another bite anyway. "What if he doesn't stop? Then we fight," Caleb said simply, "like we always do." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his palm warm against my cold fingers. The next day at school was weird, like extra weird. People were looking at me differently in the hallways. Some whispered as I passed, others stared with a mixture of curiosity and pity that made my skin crawl. A girl I barely knew, Mackenzie, came up to me during lunch and asked if everything was okay at home in this super fake concerned voice. I told her to mind her own business, which probably wasn't the smartest move, but I was freaked out. Her perfectly glossed lips formed a small O of surprise before she retreated to her friends, who all turned to stare at me. By sixth period, I figured out what was happening. Craig had somehow gotten in touch with people from my school. My chemistry lab partner Tyler showed me a message he'd received from an anonymous concerned adult, claiming I was unstable and self-destructive because of my abusive home situation. The message suggested people should document any concerning behavior to help build a case. The text was carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid outright slander while planting seeds of doubt. I felt physically sick reading it, my stomach twisting into knots. Craig was trying to turn my entire school into his personal surveillance team. I deleted the message from Tyler's phone and made him promise not to tell anyone else, but the damage was spreading. By the end of the day, at least 3 teachers had given me those pitying looks that make you want to crawl into a hole and die. Mr. Benson, my English teacher, even asked me to stay after class to ask if I needed someone to talk to. I mumbled something about being fine and practically ran from the room. When I got home, Caleb was on the phone again, his face tight with stress. He hung up quickly when he saw me, plastering on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What now?" I asked, dropping my backpack on the floor with a heavy thud. "Nothing," he said too quickly, "just work stuff." But later that night, I overheard him talking to someone in hushed tones through his bedroom door. "I don't understand. I've been there for 3 years. You know I would never..." A pause. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for the opportunity." When he came out of his room, his eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. He tried to hide it, asking about my homework and if I wanted to watch a movie, but I knew something was wrong. The way he kept fidgeting with his phone, the slight tremor in his hands as he poured himself a glass of water. "Did you lose your job?" I asked directly. He sank onto the couch, the fake cheerfulness draining from his face. "Someone called in an anonymous tip that I was stealing from the register. They did an audit, and even though they didn't find anything missing, they said they can't take the risk." My blood boiled, heat rushing to my face. "It was Craig, wasn't it?" Caleb just nodded, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. The light seemed to have gone out behind his eyes. "I'll find something else. Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I worried all night while Caleb updated his resume and applied for jobs online, the blue light from his laptop illuminating his exhausted face until 3 a.m. I worried the next morning when he drove me to school in silence, the dark circles under his eyes telling me he hadn't slept. And I worried all day at school, where the whispers about me were getting louder, following me down every hallway like persistent shadows. Within a week, Caleb had picked up 2 part-time jobs, one stocking shelves at a grocery store and another delivering food for one of those app services. He was working 16-hour days, coming home after midnight and leaving before I woke up. He left me notes on the fridge with reminders to eat and money for lunch, his handwriting becoming increasingly messy and hurried. We barely saw each other. The apartment felt emptier than ever, despite the growing pile of takeout containers and unwashed laundry that neither of us had time to deal with. The school counselor called me into her office on Friday. She was new, a woman named Ms. Reynolds with kind eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and a voice that was probably supposed to sound soothing but just made me nervous. Her office smelled like lavender and was decorated with motivational posters about reaching your potential and embracing challenges. "Someone contacted us with concerns about your home situation," she said carefully, folding her hands on her desk. "They mentioned your recent weight loss and possible neglect." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took a deep breath and explained everything. My mom's death, Caleb's custody battle, Craig's revenge campaign. Ms. Reynolds listened, taking notes notes and nodding occasionally, her pen scratching against the paper in a rhythm that matched my racing heart. "I believe you," she said when I finished, "but I need to follow protocol and do a home visit. Would next Tuesday work?" My stomach dropped. Our apartment was a mess because Caleb didn't have time to clean. He was barely sleeping. What if she thought that was evidence of neglect? I pictured her walking into our cluttered living room, seeing the unwashed dishes in the sink, the laundry piled on chairs, and making judgments that could tear us apart. "Can we make it Friday instead?" I asked, buying us some time to get things in order. I forced a smile. "It's just that Caleb has more time off then." She agreed, and I spent the entire weekend cleaning the apartment while Caleb worked. I did all the laundry, scrubbed the bathroom until it sparkled, and even tried to cook a decent meal that we could reheat for the visit. I organized our bills into neat piles, put fresh flowers on the table, and even hung up some family photos that had been sitting in a box since we moved in. Caleb came home Sunday night to find me passed out on the couch, surrounded by cleaning supplies, a half-empty bottle of disinfectant still clutched in my hand. "Olivia," he whispered, gently shaking me awake. "What are you doing?" I explained about the home visit, and his face fell, the weight of yet another burden settling on his shoulders. "I'm so sorry," he said. "This is all my fault." "No, it's Craig's fault," I corrected him, sitting up and wincing at the crick in my neck. "And we're going to be fine. We just need to make everything perfect for Friday." The home visit went okay, I think. Ms. Reynolds seemed impressed by how clean everything was, and Caleb took a rare afternoon off to be there. He was charming and attentive, showing her my straight A report cards and the schedule he'd made for us on the fridge. He'd even bought a fruit bowl and filled it with apples and bananas, as if we were the kind of household that always had fresh fruit on display. She asked to speak with me alone for a few minutes, and I reassured her that Caleb was the best guardian I could ask for. "He works so much because he wants me to have a good life," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady and convincing. "He sacrificed everything for me." She nodded, but I could tell she was still concerned about something. Her eyes kept scanning the apartment, as if looking for evidence of some hidden problem. "Has anyone unusual been contacting you?" she asked. "Any adults you don't know well?" I thought about telling her about the texts from our relatives, but something held me back. What if it just complicated things further? What if it triggered that automatic investigation the caseworker had warned about? "No," I lied. "Everything's fine." After she left, Caleb and I collapsed on the couch in exhaustion. "Do you think she bought it?" I asked, staring at the ceiling. "I hope so," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But Craig isn't going to stop." He was right. The next day, I got called to the office during third period. My heart sank when I saw the principal, Mr. Donovan, waiting for me with a woman in a navy pantsuit who introduced herself as a social worker. Her clipboard and stern expression made my heart nearly stop. "We've received multiple reports of concern," the social worker said, her voice clipped and professional. "I'd like to ask you some questions." I answered everything as calmly as I could, sticking to our story, which wasn't even a story. It was the truth, but I could tell they had already formed opinions. The social worker kept asking about my dramatic weight loss and whether Caleb monitored my food intake. It was like they were determined to twist everything into something sinister. Every answer I gave seemed to be met with skepticism, as if they were just waiting for me to slip up and reveal some terrible secret. They called Caleb, who had to leave his shift at the grocery store to come get me. The drive home was silent. I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "I can't keep doing this," he finally said as we pulled into our parking spot. "I can't keep fighting everyone." "What are you saying?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "I'm saying we need to end this. Somehow, we need to stop Craig." That night, I made a decision. If Craig wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. I was going to confront him directly and record his confession. It was risky, but I was desperate. The thought of Caleb losing custody of me, of being placed with strangers or worse, with those relatives who suddenly cared about me, was unbearable. I found his new address through some social media stalking. He'd moved into a fancy apartment downtown, probably still funded by his parents' money. The building had a doorman and sleek glass windows that reflected the city lights. The next day after school, instead of going home, I took the bus there, rehearsing what I would say the entire ride. My hands were shaking as I knocked on his door. When Craig opened it, his surprised expression quickly morphed into a smug smile. He looked exactly as I remembered. Perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, and that arrogant smirk that made me want to punch him. "Well, well, look who it is," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Shouldn't you be at home waiting for your brother to feed you?" I had my phone recording in my pocket. "I know what you're doing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The false reports, contacting those relatives, getting Caleb fired. Why are you doing this to us?" Craig laughed, actually laughed. "Your brother humiliated me, threw me out like trash. Nobody does that to me. So you're trying to get me taken away from him? That's seriously messed up. It's called consequences," Craig said, his voice hardening. "Your brother needs to learn that he can't just—" He stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing. "What's that in your pocket?" Before I could react, he grabbed my arm and yanked my phone out. When he saw it was recording, his face contorted with rage. He threw it against the wall, where it shattered into pieces, the screen splintering like a spider web. "You stupid little bitch," he hissed, gripping my arm so tight it hurt. "You think you can trap me? Get out before I call the cops and tell them you broke in here." I ran all the way to the bus stop, tears streaming down my face, my arm throbbing where he'd grabbed me. I'd failed completely, and now I didn't even have a phone to call Caleb. The bruises were already forming, dark fingerprints on my skin that would be hard to explain. I borrowed a stranger's phone at the bus stop to call him, and he picked me up in a panic. When I told him what happened, he was furious. Not at me, but at himself for not protecting me better. His face paled when he saw the bruises on on my arm, and for a moment, I thought he might drive straight to Craig's apartment. "We need help," he admitted as we drove home. "We can't do this alone anymore." That's when I had an idea. What about Jenna, Caleb's ex-girlfriend, the one he'd broken up with for my custody case? They'd been so in love, and she'd been so understanding about everything. She was smart and resourceful, and most importantly, Craig had never met her. I remembered how she used to make us laugh, how she helped me with my homework, how she made our apartment feel like a home. "I can't ask her for help," Caleb said, shaking his head. "Not after how things ended." "Let me ask her then," I insisted. "The worst she can say is no." I found Jenna on Instagram and sent her a message from a new account I created at the library. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately and agreed to meet me at a coffee shop the next day. I spent the night tossing and turning, hoping she wouldn't change her mind. Jenna looked different than I remembered. Her hair was shorter, cut into a stylish bob, and she seemed more confident somehow. But her smile was just as warm when she saw me, lighting up her whole face. "Olivia," she said, hugging me tight, "you've grown up so much." I told her everything, not holding anything back, about Craig's manipulation, the custody threats, Caleb working himself to death. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each new detail. She winced when I showed her the bruises on my arm. "That absolute a-hole," she said when I finished. "Of course I'll help. What do you need me to do?" My plan was simple but risky. Jenna would approach Craig at a bar he frequented, pretend to be interested in him, and get him talking about what he was doing to us. She'd record the whole thing on her phone. "He's seen me try to record him once," I explained. "He'll never suspect you." Jenna nodded, determination in her eyes. "I can handle guys like Craig, trust me." The next night, Jenna put the plan into action. I was a nervous wreck waiting for news, pacing our apartment while Caleb watched me with concern. He still wasn't fully on board with involving his ex, but he was desperate enough to try anything. Every time my phone pinged, we both jumped. Around midnight, Jenna texted me, "Got it, meeting you tomorrow." I barely slept that night. The next day, Jenna met us at a quiet park. She looked tired but triumphant as she handed over her phone. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, and she grimaced as she wiped a lingering trace of Craig's cologne from her wrist. "Listen to this," she said, pressing play. Craig's voice came through clearly. "Yeah, I've been messing with this guy who kicked me out. Anonymous calls, contacting his family, even got him fired. The best part is I'm going after his custody of his sister. Once she's gone, he'll have nothing left." Jenna's voice asked innocently, "Isn't that a bit extreme?" Craig laughed. "He deserves it. Besides, it's not like the kid matters. She's just collateral damage." I felt sick listening to it, but Caleb's face showed pure relief. "This is it," he said. "This is what we needed." But instead of confronting Craig directly, Caleb had a better idea. He contacted Craig's parents. Craig had always bragged about how his parents paid for everything: his apartment, his car, his lifestyle. They were wealthy and image conscious, the kind of people who donated to charities to get their names on buildings, the kind who would be mortified by their son's behavior if they knew the truth. Caleb arranged a meeting with them at their country club, dressed in the one nice outfit he owned. I insisted on coming too, wearing a borrowed dress from a friend. Jenna drove us there and waited in the car, giving Caleb's hand a squeeze before we went in. The country club was intimidating, all polished marble and hushed voices, but I held my head high as we were escorted to the Pattersons' table. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were exactly as I'd imagined, polished, cold, and clearly annoyed at having to meet with us. They sat stiffly across from us at a private table, barely touching their drinks. Mrs. Patterson's diamond earrings caught the light every time she moved her head, and Mr. Patterson checked his expensive watch twice in the first 5 minutes. "I'll be brief," Caleb said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Your son has been systematically trying to destroy my life and take my sister away from me." Mrs. Patterson scoffed. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, it is," Caleb agreed. "That's why I brought evidence." He played the recording. As Craig's voice filled the air between us, the Pattersons' expressions changed from dismissive to horrified. By the end, Mrs. Patterson's hand was covering her mouth, and Mr. Patterson's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "We had no idea," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "We knew Craig was difficult, but he's been using your financial support to fund this vendetta," Caleb explained. "I'm not asking for money or compensation. I just want him to stop." Mr. Patterson nodded grimly. "He will. I promise you that." 2 days later, Craig called Caleb, screaming obscenities. His parents had cut him off completely. No more apartment, no more allowance, nothing. He threatened to make us pay, but his threats sounded hollow now that he had no resources to back them up. The calls to the school and social services mysteriously stopped. The relatives who had been texting me suddenly went silent. Caleb even got a call from his old boss, offering him his job back after a misunderstanding. Apparently, Mr. Patterson had made some calls of his own. It wasn't an immediate fix for everything. We still had bills to pay, and the social worker still checked in occasionally, but the constant threat hanging over our heads was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my chest began to loosen. One evening, about a week later, there was a knock at our door. Caleb opened it to find Jenna standing there with a bag of takeout, the smell of Thai food wafting through the apartment. "I thought you guys might be hungry," she said, smiling tentatively. Caleb hesitated for just a moment before stepping aside to let her in. As we sat around our small kitchen table eating Thai food, I watched them carefully avoid eye contact while stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. The tension between them was palpable, but not in a bad way, more like electricity waiting for a spark. "You should stay for a movie," I suggested innocently when we finished eating. Jenna looked at Caleb, who nodded with a small smile. "I'd like that." As they settled on the couch, carefully maintaining maintaining space between them. I excused myself to my room. Through the crack in my door, I watched as they gradually moved closer throughout the movie, their hands eventually finding each other in the darkness. I smiled to myself as I closed my door. We weren't completely okay yet, but we were getting there. Caleb had sacrificed so much for me over the years. Maybe now it was time for him to get something back. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. I found Caleb in the kitchen, humming as he flipped a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate. Jenna was setting the table, looking comfortable in one of Caleb's t-shirts. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said when she saw me. "Hungry?" I nodded, taking a seat at the table. As Caleb placed a stack of pancakes in front of me, I noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. He was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached his eyes and made the corners crinkle. "What?" he asked when he caught me staring. "Nothing," I said, reaching for the syrup. "Just glad to see you happy." And I was. After everything we'd been through, all the sacrifices and struggles, my brother deserved some happiness. As for me, I was starting to eat normally again, and the nightmares were less frequent. I still missed my mom every day, but the pain wasn't as sharp anymore. That afternoon, I found Caleb and Jenna looking at bills at the kitchen table. They stopped talking when I walked in, exchanging a glance I couldn't interpret. "What's going on?" I asked, immediately suspicious. "We were just discussing some ideas," Jenna said carefully. "About the future." "What about it?" Caleb took a deep breath. "Jenna's lease is up next month. We were thinking, maybe she could move in with us, help with rent, you know." I studied their nervous faces and realized this wasn't just about money. "Are you two back together?" "We're figuring things out," Caleb said, looking at Jenna with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "But we wanted to make sure you were okay with it first. You come first, always." I pretended to consider it seriously, watching them squirm. "Well, she does make better pancakes than you." Caleb laughed, relief washing over his face. "Is that a yes?" I nodded, and he pulled me into a hug. Over his shoulder, I saw Jenna watching us with tears in her eyes. She mouthed "thank you" to me, and I smiled back. That night, as I lay in bed listening to their quiet conversation in the living room, I thought about everything we'd been through. The accident, losing mom, the custody battle, Craig's revenge. It had been a hell of a journey, but somehow, we'd made it through. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and pancakes. I found Jenna and Caleb in the kitchen, talking in low voices that stopped when I walked in. I raised an eyebrow at them. "Morning," I said, grabbing a plate. "You guys look suspicious." Caleb laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just talking about boring adult stuff." "Right," I said, not believing him for a second. I piled pancakes on my plate, drowning them in syrup. I'd been eating better lately, trying to get back to a healthy weight. Caleb watched me eat with that subtle look of relief he always got when I finished a meal. After breakfast, Jenna left for work, giving Caleb a quick kiss and squeezing my shoulder as she passed. As soon as the door closed, I turned to my brother. "Okay, what's really going on?" Caleb sighed, rubbing his face. "Craig's parents called me yesterday." My stomach dropped. "What did they want?" "To warn us. Apparently Craig's been making threats. Nothing specific, just hammered ramblings about getting even and making us pay. They're worried he might try something." I rolled my eyes, trying to act braver than I felt. "What's he gonna do? His parents cut him off and he has no proof of anything." "I know, but still. Be extra careful, okay? Don't go anywhere alone for a while." I agreed, but honestly, I wasn't that worried. Craig seemed pathetic now, all his power stripped away. What could he possibly do? I found out a week later. I was at my locker between classes when my friend Zoe rushed up to me, her face pale. "Olivia, have you seen the school website?" she asked, her voice hushed. My heart started racing immediately. "No, why?" She pulled out her phone and showed me. There was a post on the school's anonymous confessions page. It had my picture, clearly taken without my knowledge, looking skeletal during my worst days of not eating. The caption read, "This is what happens when your guardian is too busy with his new girlfriend to notice you're starving yourself. Save Olivia, report abuse." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Students were already staring and whispering. The post had hundreds of comments, some expressing concern, others speculating wildly about my home life. Someone had even tagged the local news. I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, trying not to throw up. My phone buzzed with notifications, people tagging me, messaging me, asking if I was okay. I turned it off, unable to deal with it. The school counselor called me to her office during third period. She looked genuinely concerned as I slumped into the chair across from her desk. "Olivia, I've seen the post," she said gently. "I want you to know we're taking it very seriously." "It's not true," I said immediately. "My brother isn't abusing me. Someone's trying to hurt us." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "I understand, but I'm required to report any allegations of abuse. A social worker will need to interview you and your brother again." I felt tears welling up. This is exactly what he wants. Craig is doing this to punish us. "Craig?" she asked, leaning forward. "The former roommate you mentioned before?" I nodded, wiping my eyes. "He's been trying to get revenge ever since my brother kicked him out. He's the one who posted that picture." Ms. Reynolds frowned. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" I shook my head miserably. "Not anymore. He destroyed my phone when I tried to record him admitting it. The rest of the day was a nightmare. Everyone was staring at me. Teachers were giving me those pitying looks again, and I overheard someone saying they'd always suspected something was off about my situation. By the time Caleb picked me up, I was a wreck. I showed him the post in the car. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "I'm going to call him," he said quietly. "Caleb, no, that's what he wants. He wants you to lose control so they'll take me away." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to relax. "You're right. We need to be smart about this." When we got home, Jenna was waiting for us. She'd already seen the post. Apparently it had spread beyond the school website to other social media platforms. forms. She hugged me tightly while Caleb paced the living room, making calls to our caseworker and a lawyer friend who'd helped with the custody case. "We need to take legal action," Jenna said when he hung up. "This is defamation, and it's targeted harassment of a minor." Caleb nodded. "Mark says we can file for a restraining order, but we need proof it was Craig." I groaned. "Which we don't have because he destroyed my phone." Jenna's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Maybe not directly, but what about the IP address? If we can prove the post came from his computer or phone, the school would never release that information to us," Caleb said. "No, but they might to the police," Jenna countered, "if we file a harassment report." The next day, we did exactly that. The officer who took our statement seemed skeptical at first, but when we showed him the pattern of events, the false abuse report, the relatives suddenly contacting me, Caleb losing his job, and now this post, he started taking notes more seriously. "We'll request the IP information from the school," he said. "In the meantime, document everything. Any contact, any new posts, anything suspicious at all." A social worker named Mrs. Patel came to our apartment that afternoon. She was different from the previous ones, sharper, more observant, less easily convinced by our clean apartment and practiced answers. She interviewed me alone in my room, asking pointed questions about my eating habits, my relationship with Caleb, and how I felt about Jenna moving in. "I love having Jenna here," I told her honestly. "She's like the big sister I never had, and she makes Caleb happy, which makes me happy." Mrs. Patel nodded, making notes. "And the weight loss? Can you explain that?" I took a deep breath and told her the whole truth about Craig's manipulation, how he'd made me feel like a burden, how I'd stopped eating to cope. I showed her my food diary that my therapist had suggested I keep, documenting my recovery. "I'm doing better now," I said. "I'm eating regularly. You can check with my doctor." She seemed satisfied with that, but her final question caught me off guard. "Olivia, if you could live anywhere right now, where would it be?" I answered without hesitation. "Right here, with Caleb and Jenna. They're my family." After she left, we all collapsed on the couch, emotionally drained. "That wasn't so bad," Jenna said, trying to sound optimistic. "It wasn't good either," Caleb muttered. "She's going to file a report, and then we'll have to deal with more interviews, more scrutiny." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "We'll get through it. We always do." The next day at school was slightly better. The principal had removed the post and made an announcement about the consequences of cyberbullying, though he was careful not to mention me specifically. Still, the damage was done. People were still whispering, still looking at me like I was some kind of tragic victim. During lunch, I was sitting alone when Tyler, my chemistry partner, sat down across from me. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "You okay?" I shrugged. "Been better." I just wanted to say, I don't believe that post. My parents divorced when I was 10, and my dad said all kinds of messed up things about my mom to try to get custody. People suck sometimes. I felt a lump in my throat. "Thanks, Tyler." He smiled, then pushed his chocolate pudding cup toward me. "You can have this if you want. I'm not really a chocolate guy." It was such a small gesture, but it nearly made me cry. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe not everyone was against us. When I got home, Caleb and Jenna were waiting with unexpected news. The police had traced the IP address of the post. It hadn't come from Craig's apartment or phone. It had come from a coffee shop near his place. The officer explained that Craig had probably used the public Wi-Fi to avoid being traced directly. "So we have nothing," I said, deflating. "Not exactly," Jenna said, a small smile playing on her lips. "The coffee shop has security cameras. The police are getting the footage from the time the post was made." Hope flickered inside me. "So if Craig was there, we'll have proof," Caleb finished, squeezing my hand. 2 days later, we got the call. The footage clearly showed Craig sitting in the coffee shop, typing on his laptop at exactly the time the post was made. It wasn't definitive proof, but combined with everything else, it was enough for the police to question him. Craig denied everything, of course, but when they searched his apartment, with a warrant based on the accumulated evidence, they found something damning. A folder on his laptop labeled Olivia, containing the photo from the post, and several others taken without my knowledge, plus drafts of messages to my school and the social services department. The restraining order was granted immediately. Craig was charged with harassment and cyberstalking of a minor, which were apparently pretty serious charges. His parents, mortified by the whole situation, hired him an expensive lawyer who worked out a plea deal, probation, mandatory therapy, and most importantly, a legal order to stay at least 500 feet away from me and Caleb at all times. Mrs. Patel came back for one final visit after everything was resolved. This time, she seemed much more relaxed, even smiling as she looked through her notes. "I'm recommending your case be closed," she told Caleb. "There's no evidence of any abuse or neglect. In fact, I'm impressed by how you've handled this situation and protected your sister." Caleb looked like he might cry from relief. "Thank you. I should warn you," she added. "Those relatives may still try to make trouble, but with this documentation of harassment, any claims they make will be viewed with extreme skepticism." After she left, the three of us celebrated with ice cream and a movie marathon. For the first time in months, I felt completely safe. The weight of Craig's revenge campaign had been lifted, and we could finally breathe again. School gradually got better too. The rumors died down, especially after the principal made another announcement vaguely referencing false information and ongoing legal matters. Tyler started sitting with me regularly at lunch, and eventually some of his friends joined us too. I wasn't exactly popular, but I wasn't the school pariah anymore either. Caleb got his old job back with an apology and a small raise. He cut back his hours at the grocery store but kept the delivery gig on weekends for extra money. Our finances were still tight, but not desperate anymore. One night about a month later, I came home from studying at the library to find Caleb and Jenna sitting at the kitchen table, looking serious again. My heart immediately sank. What now? I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. Nothing bad, Caleb assured me quickly. We just want to talk to you about something. I sat down cautiously. Okay, Jenna and I have been thinking, he started, glancing at her nervously. The lease on this apartment is up next month, and we've been looking at houses. Houses? I repeated, confused. We can't afford a house. Actually, Jenna said, my parents have offered to help with a down payment as an early wedding present. I blinked. Wedding present? Caleb grinned, reaching for Jenna's hand. That's when I noticed the small diamond ring on her finger. I asked her last night. We're thinking next summer. I squealed and jumped up to hug them both. Oh my god, that's amazing. So you're okay with it? Caleb asked, his eyes searching mine. With us getting married, looking for a house, all of it? Are you kidding? I've been waiting for you two to get back together since the day you broke up. They both laughed, relief evident on their faces. Jenna pulled out her tablet and showed me the houses they'd been looking at. Nothing fancy, just small 3-bedroom places with yards in decent neighborhoods. We thought you might want to help choose, she said, since you'll be living there too, at least until college. I felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost knocked me over. Even in this moment, they were thinking of me, including me. I'd love that, I managed to say around the lump in my throat. The next weekend, we went to look at houses. The third one we visited was perfect. A little older, a little smaller than the others, but with a huge backyard and a kitchen that made Jenna's eyes light up. The realtor left us alone to discuss, and we stood in what could be our future living room. What do you think? Caleb asked me. I looked around, trying to imagine our furniture in this space, pictures on these walls, our lives unfolding in these rooms. I love it, I said honestly. Me too, Jenna agreed. It feels like home already. Caleb nodded, a soft smile on his face. Then let's make an offer. 2 months later, we moved in. Our apartment furniture looked a bit lost in the bigger space, but Jenna's parents gave us their old couch and dining table, and we slowly filled the empty corners. I painted my room dark blue and hung string lights across the ceiling. It was the first space that had ever felt truly mine. On moving day, as we collapsed exhausted among the boxes, Caleb handed me a small wrapped package. What's this? I asked. Just open it, he said, smiling. Inside was a framed photo of Mom, one I'd never seen before. She was young, maybe my age, laughing at something off camera. She looked so happy, so full of life. I found it in one of her old albums, Caleb explained. Thought you might want it for your room. I hugged him tight, tears threatening. Thank you. That night, I placed the photo on my nightstand and lay in my new room, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and settling sounds of our house. I could hear Caleb and Jenna talking softly in the living room, the occasional laugh drifting up the stairs. Outside my window, stars dotted the sky above our backyard, brighter here than they'd been in the city. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. We'd been through hell together, Caleb and I, but we'd made it to the other side. And now our little family was growing, changing in ways I never could have imagined. I thought about that day all those years ago, when my brother sold his prized baseball glove to buy me a new bike. This is what brothers are for, he'd told me. He'd been right, of course, but it was more than that. This home, this safety, this love, this is what family is for.